President Trump appears to be backing down from his aggressive immigration crackdown that's led to chaotic and deadly scenes in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Joining me to discuss, Niall Stanage, White House columnist here at The Hill. Hey, Niall, thanks for coming on. So you have this new article out where you lay out kind of this new direction for the Trump administration. Greg Bovino kind of been the face of the Border Patrol there in Minneapolis, and some of his Border Patrol agents are leaving the city. President Trump said he had a call with Governor Walz, a Democrat, that they were on the similar wavelength. And the White House is also distancing itself from some of the more controversial comments made by Kristi Noem and Stephen Miller. Why?
Because I think this whole sequence of events has proven very, very politically damaging to the president. And I say that, Drew, because as you're well aware, we're accustomed to lots of controversies in American political life, breaking down along very predictable partisan lines. This has gone beyond that, has crossed over the political dynamics in a lot of ways. There have been Republican senators who have been critical of what has taken place. There have been conservative media, a Wall Street Journal editorial, for example, talking about this as a moral and political debacle for the Trump presidency. So I think that speaks to the damage it was causing.
How much of this do you think stems from some of the statements that we've heard from the administration, especially as it regards to Alex Pretti? He is the man who was killed over the weekend in Minneapolis. They labeled him a domestic terrorist, said he was brandishing a gun, called him assassin. There's multiple videos from many different angles of what happened there. None of them seem to support what the administration was suggesting. And that ends up putting Republicans in a difficult position. And that is what has forced potentially the administration to backtrack here. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think this is a delicate one to talk about because obviously we are focused on the politics because that's our job. At the same time, we don't want to leap past the enormously traumatic scenes that pretty much everybody in America and many people around the world have seen of Alex Pretti being shot to death. But to your point about the politics, I think the response with some of those statements that you quoted obviously drew a lot of genuinely felt outrage and obviously put some of the Republicans that we're talking about in a position where they simply didn't feel they could defend those statements because the statements were frankly contradicted by the evidence everyone was seeing in front of their eyes. And I think that was part of the political dynamic here.
So now President Trump is going to send his border czar, Tom Homan, up to Minneapolis to possibly quell the situation and make things a little bit less tense. I don't know, most people don't really, especially on the left and left of center, consider Tom Homan to be a moderate on immigration issues. What do you make of the notion that he can be the person to diffuse the situation?
We'll see how that goes. Now, there has been some reporting in the media generally that Tom Homan has argued for a somewhat more selective approach with immigration enforcement generally. You're quite right to allude to the fact that he does have pretty hawkish or restrictionist views on illegal immigration. He's not out of step with President Trump in that regard, but I think a lot comes down to the approach here, and the approach which has seen the violent death of 2 US citizens in recent weeks. Well, I mean that speaks for itself. It doesn't, well, people can make of that what they will. The point is, I think Homan is trying to get to a circumstance where there is less of a less outrage caused by the approach taken.
During the Trump era, there is usually reluctance on the part of Republicans, conservatives, to speak out against President Trump. What do you make of the willingness? You talked about the editorial boards. You've also had gun rights groups and some really MAGA elected officials, thinking about Texas Governor Greg Abbott, Ted Cruz, some members of the House that are reliable MAGA allies, being willingness to not just speak out, but to put their names out there as opponents of this policy.
It does, I think, speak to the way the killing of Mr. Pretti has reached beyond those normal political lines. We could talk for quite a while about the whole Second Amendment element to all of this, where the administration seemed to be in the position of arguing that you shouldn't bring a legally held firearm to a protest when that is a legal right and not prohibited at all under Minnesota law. That was one problem for the administration. But those other voices that you cited, voices that are not prone to criticism of President Trump generally, being so outspoken, I think that does speak to the political potency of the issue.
Do you think the job of DHS Secretary Kristi Noem could be in jeopardy? Obviously, Democrats want her out, including John Fetterman, who's been one of the more Democrats who has been less critical of the Trump administration. He said that she is betraying DHS's core mission and trashing your border security legacy. Fetterman there directly referencing that message to President Trump. Do you think this could be the first time that President Trump bows to public pressure to oust one of his cabinet officials?
I think the way you ask the question is very useful, actually, because I think whatever he believes about Noem's performance, he is reluctant to be seen to bowing to public pressure. The New York Times has reported that there was a lengthy meeting at the White House, Kristi Noem at the White House yesterday evening, I believe it was. And so there's obviously a lot of speculation about her future. Predicting what Donald Trump will do in any circumstance at any point in his life has been a difficult task. But I think certainly this has reputationally damaged Kristi Noem. I'm just not sure that that necessarily leads to her removal from her current position.
More broadly, do you think this episode might show the limits of President Trump's ability to resist pressure? I mean, we also, in addition to this, had he backed off of his push to seize Greenland. He retreated on the comments, disparaging comments that he made questioning the valor of British troops. Now we have this. I think Trump's presidencies have been kind of characterized as his ability to buck tradition, but in these instances, it shows over the last several weeks there have been cases where the normal laws of political gravity might seem to apply to this president.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. The three examples that you cited all demonstrated that Trump does occasionally back down if he is met with resolute enough opposition. The bigger picture, Drew, I think, is that merely a tactical retreat for the moment before Trump returns to his usual stance of pushing boundaries, or is it a more fundamental recalibration? We have seen in the past sometimes him temper his rhetoric, for example, for a day or two after major controversies, and then he returns to his usual hyper-combative tone. So will we see that again? I think it's quite possible we will, but it's certainly been an interesting and telling sequence of events that we've seen recently.
And maybe on the other side of that, is this a lesson that both allies and foes of the president take, that you can stand up to him and achieve some of your aims?
Yeah, I think that's also true. I'm going from memory here, but I think Governor Walz was tweeting yesterday about never having been more proud to be a Minnesotan, obviously implying or suggesting that the people of Minnesota had stood up and won in this battle. So I think that there is, from that side of the political equation, there is heart to be taken from this, because that resoluteness does appear to have forced, at the least, a rhetorical change in tone and some changes, like Greg Bovino moving on from the Trump administration.
Yeah, obviously a story we'll continue to follow, but for now we will leave it at that. Niall Stanage, White House columnist here at The Hill. Thank you.
Thanks, Drew.